first of all, welcome everybody after the vacation. I hope we are ready for a good work in the second part of the year. We have a lot of work to do, and we have with a busy agenda for the meeting today and tomorrow morning. The first thing I would like to ask you, do you accept the agenda which was sent? Do you have any suggestions on the agenda? No, I see. So I accept that the adoption of the agenda is done, and we continue working on this agenda. Second point is approval of the minutes. The draft minutes of the meeting of 7th of July 2014 and 23rd of July 2014 are in your meeting papers. I propose that, as usual, unless any objections are raised today in the course of this meeting, they be deemed approved. Are there objections on the minutes from the previous meetings? No. Thank you. I accept that the minutes are approved. The third point, which is in our agenda, is adoption of draft calendar of REGI meetings for 2015. You have the draft of the calendar for the meetings in 2015 in your papers. And I have to mention that the services responsible for planning committee and delegation meetings, for booking the interpretation and meeting rooms, have made a proposal. We have to approve this proposal. You may have some comments on the proposal, on the calendar for the meetings. Are there any suggestions, proposals on the calendar? No, as I understand, no proposals and suggestions. So the calendar is approved. And the fourth point in our agenda is Chair's announcement. I'll surprise you. I do not have announcement. So we can jump to the fifth point in our agenda, exchange of views with Mr. Graziano Delrio, State Secretary of the Prime Minister, on the priorities of the Italian Presidency of the Council. As you know, we always invite the relevant minister to come to our committee for an exchange of views about the priorities of the Presidency of the Council. Today, we are pleased to welcome Mr. Graziano Delrio from the Italian Presidency of the Council, which began work on 1st of July. This is a difficult time for the Union, and we wish the ministers very success presidency and success work during the presidency. Mr. Del Rio is one of Prime Minister Renzi's most senior political advisors. He is currently in charge of cohesion policy. In 2013-2014, he was Minister for Regional Affairs in the government of Mr. Letta, and he spent almost a decade as a mayor of Reggio Emilia. Is that correct?
Yes.
No mistakes. Thank you. So he is very familiar with the regional and cohesion policy. Very impressive biography, and I'll be happy to hear his thoughts about the regional policy. I suggest that we proceed as follows. I will invite the Minister to make a brief presentation lasting about 15 minutes or so about the priorities of the Presidency in the area for which our committee is responsible. And then we'll have a question and answer session in 2 rounds, beginning with the coordinators of the group. We have time until 4:30 for this item of our business. And I have a pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Delrio.
Thank you very much, President Mihailova. Gentile Presidente, gentili onorevoli.
President, members of the committee, it's an honour for me to be here today in the European Parliament to tell you about the Italian presidency of the Council of the European Union, and with particular reference to cohesion policy, and to have a discussion with you about some of the most relevant issues. Dialogue with the European Parliament, and specifically with the Committee on Regional Development, is within my direct competence in the field of cohesion policy, and therefore this dialogue is a very important opportunity which the Italian presidency wishes to make the most of. Before our dialogue, I would like to make 3 main points. First of all, I would like to tell you about the Italian presidency's programme and the role of cohesion. Then share some reflections on the main elements of the 2014-2020 legislative package. And then finally, I will conclude with initiatives we'll undertake under the course of our presidency to endorse some new innovations which are in the new regulations. So the first point is the programme for the Italian presidency. The backdrop to Italy's presidency is marked by the new parliament and a new life cycle in the community institutions. So we have the new parliamentary time, but we also have equally important institutional developments in the Commission and the Council. So the presidency is ensuring continuity in the work carried out by the institutions in such an important transitional phase. On the economic and social level, we're seeing the first signs of recovery, but the latest summer Eurostat data on growth and unemployment have confirmed the need that we need growth-oriented actions. This is something that's common to most member states, although the causes and possible solutions are quite different. We're facing a very serious situation, particularly when it comes to its implications at social and cohesion level, and I think they can be summarised in some key data. 25 million unemployed women and men in Europe, of which 5 million are under the age of 25, and almost a quarter of the EU population is at risk of poverty and social exclusion, with 6.5 million people, with an increase of 6.5 million people between 2008 and 2012. The recent adoption of the 6th cohesion report on socio-economic and territorial cohesion is an excellent basis and provides some points for reflection, which will also be developed in the framework of the Council conclusions. I would just point out that so far, the 6th cohesion report summarises the serious problem that we're facing in the following way. Between 2008 and 2013, public investment dropped by 20% in real terms in the EU. And this would have been even higher had the cohesion policy not ensured support. The data reveal obstacles that have to be overcome and profound social unease, and this is something that's affecting the different regions and member states asymmetrically, as members of this committee are well aware. I would just like to repeat what we were able to state at the 6th European Cohesion Forum. We don't want to see this declining Europe. We have to work to ensure that we strengthen the positive signals that have been seen so far. The Italian presidency programme focuses therefore on 3 lines: reviving economic growth and employment firstly, secondly bringing Europe closer to its citizens when it comes to freedom, democracy and respect for human rights, and thirdly supporting the EU as a main actor on the international stage. Obviously, this committee will be interested mostly in economic growth and the employment increase, so I'd just like to go through a few points which are particularly relevant to the Italian presidency's programme in these areas. Firstly, the first contribution we want to make is to review and revive the 2020 strategy in light of the data I've just been through. The Commission should have completed this next year, so therefore we need to start our reflections on this very soon. We're currently opening up a debate within the Council and interested parties within the Council on how to increase the relevance and effectiveness of the Europe 2020 strategy. And this debate will also be held in a session of the General Affairs Council in November, which will be specifically dedicated to cohesion. And I'll come back to this in my conclusion. The second line for development is the economic and social dimension of the European Monetary Union. This is an issue which is strongly related to an initiative undertaken within our policy area. We're summoning an informal meeting of ministers responsible for cohesion, and there we'll deal with economic governance and cohesion policy and the correlation between the two. As part of the measures aimed at reviving growth, the Italian presidency is devoting special attention to ensuring support to the real economy, competitiveness in the manufacturing sector, and particularly SMEs. The whole set of actions should result in progress in the sector of employment, and in particular in youth employment. Therefore, we fully support the implementation and the full implementation of the methods that have already been introduced by the EU in this area, particularly the Youth Guarantee and the Youth Employment Initiative. Clearly, cohesion policy plays a precise role within each of these above issues and can ensure extremely important contribution to each and all of them. The cohesion policy is actually the EU development policy. It provides support for the EU Europe 2020 strategy. Cohesion policy is vital to EU integration. It can broaden the advantages of integration and therefore ensure its sustainability. Support ensured by the Regional Development Committee in the European Parliament to consolidate this and enhance awareness about it is of crucial importance and will continue to be so. The need to strengthen growth perspectives and employment recovery within the EU can be seen by views expressed by the EU institutions. Each actor has to play its own role, whether this is the Member States or the Commission. This is the shared message that came out of the last European Council in June, with particular reference to the EU strategic agenda for the next 5 years. In this, employment, growth and competitiveness are going to continue to play an essential role. In line with the newly appointed Commission President, Mr. Juncker, who we wish all the best to, he has announced a €300 billion additional investment plan over the next 3 years. This is going to be set out in the first months of his mandate. It's very important that the ECB President, Mr. Draghi, has also recently announced a public investment plan. Support for the ECB is very important. It doesn't support, but it integrates Member States' commitment for required structural reforms. I would also just like to recall in here that my country, Italy, is currently fully implementing important reforms in line with the 2020 strategy. For example, reforms in the constitution, public administration, justice and the labour market. Coming back to growth, we're not starting from scratch. The cohesion policy can play an important role in contributing to EU growth and support public recovery and public investment. This is the main tool we have to overcome the crisis. It's not by chance that the full use of the EU structural funds is something that's called for in the EU strategic agenda and is supported also by the European Council. This is because it's one of the main options available to us to support a relaunch of investment. Furthermore, a review of the 2020 strategy should be an opportunity to ensure that we fully capitalise on cohesion policy potential. So I'll move on now to my second point, and this is the 2014-2020 legislative package and its main points. After difficult negotiations over 2 years, in December last year we reached an agreement on the legislative package for the 2014-2020 cohesion policy package. I would therefore like to thank the European Parliament and the Commission for the work that they did jointly on this very difficult dossier. It's very important for European citizens. I would also like to thank the Parliament specifically for their contribution. Because of them, the EU now has remarkable financial resources for public investments in the 2014-2020 period, €366 billion at current prices. Taking account of national co-financing, the overall amount of resources available should be more than €450 billion. This is a huge amount of potential which will be fully used. In the current phase, we need to reconcile rigorous management of public finances with the relaunch of investment for growth. The European Parliament resolution from the 8th of October 2013 on the effects of budgetary constraints for regional and local authorities regarding the EU's structural funds expenditure in the Member States and recent independent analyses have highlighted the need to exclude cohesion policy from national co-financing, cohesion policy national co-financing from the deficit calculations under the Growth and Stability Pact. I believe that support to growth-oriented investment is not opposed to budget discipline. On the contrary, it should reinforce the sustainability of budget discipline as it contributes to improving GDP and is a denominator of the ratios used as a reference within the EU economic governance. This and other issues relating to economic governance and macroeconomic conditionality will be debated at political level within the informal ministerial meeting of the coming 10th of October. The goal of this meeting will focus on the complementary relationship between cohesion policy and economic governance. Budgetary rigour and growth are at the heart of discussions at the moment, and that's what we'll be looking at in the meeting. We'd be very pleased to hear from President Mihalova on this, on such an important issue. As I recall, the quantitative data of 2014-2020 legislative package are vital to our joint work. I would like to say that as well as financing, we have to ensure that the funds are used in an effective way and that their quality is important as their quantity. We jointly steered cohesion policy investments towards full deployment of the pursued and expected positive results. When it comes to quality, I would stress that we need a more results-oriented approach. This is an essential feature of the Commission proposal and one which the Parliament and the Council have supported through the negotiation process, and which is now in the legislative package. We need to make changes which are ensured to both citizens and enterprises following the implementation of cohesion policy investments. In any specific area, whether it's research, SMEs, climate change, education, the rules applying to the current period require us to clearly identify and punctually indicate the progress we wish to attain through the investment of EU funds. I believe this is a positive point and will lead us towards stronger effectiveness and will be a better benefit to both those paying and those benefiting from them. The results-oriented approach also explains other essential innovations in the 2020 legislative package, connection between the region's development needs and coordination with the 2020 strategy and the relevant country-specific recommendations, the introduction of ex-ante conditionalities, which are obviously results-oriented, thematic concentration, and greater scattering of interventions is not helpful here, and enhanced attention to partnership within the European Code of Conduct. Please allow me, President and members of the committee, to express my gratitude once again for the compromise which was reached on the conclusion of an engaging negotiation session concerning the new set of rules. Many fundamental elements of such regulations, ranging from the mentioned Code of Conduct on Partnership to multiple amendments made to the original design of macroeconomic conditionality rules, are the direct result of the negotiation activity performed by the European Parliament. And I think this will prove extremely valuable over the 2014-2020 programming implementation period. In this regard, I imagine that the Parliament, the Commission and the Council will jointly engage to enforce the amendments introduced to ensure that in a few years' time, the first concrete improvements within the thematic areas addressed by cohesion policy investments will be seen across EU regions. The European Presidency has tried to seize the opportunity for new and diverse cooperation among EU institutions to maximise chances and to further enhance the effectiveness of the cohesion policy and its contribution to growth. I would therefore like to recall that we intend to favour the entry into force of delegated acts as per EU regulations, and which the Commission will adopt through the semester of our presidency in the field of public-private partnership and correction of irregularities. In this regard, we will draw on the excellent work done by the Greek presidency and by the procedures that it's already set up. Nevertheless, the most relevant initiative at political level will lie in promoting a structured political debate on cohesion policy. As you know, to date, cohesion policy, namely, as I said, we think that the cohesion policy is the EU's development policy and represents almost a third of EU budget, but it does not have a regular and formal forum for debate within the Council. The impression gained through the initiatives of the Greek presidency and supported by Commissioner Hahn, who's done some excellent work in recent years on this, to ensure that cohesion policy at the centre of Council debate. However, the impression is that there is widespread awareness of the significant benefits for cohesion policy if we start to put these at political level in debates. So, in addition to the informal ministerial meeting, which is always held, and continuing an initiative already taken under the Polish presidency in 2011, we convened a General Affairs Council on the 19th of November, which will be specifically devoted to the cohesion policy. We think it shows the importance we attach to cohesion and its contribution to growth opportunities. The benefits deriving from a regulated political debate are evident, but I would just emphasise that our aim is to give further recognition to the relevance of innovations in the new regulations and to fully enhance them. Several provisions of the 2014-2020 legislative package refer to a more intense political dialogue among the institutions, Parliament, Commission, Council, Committee of the Regions and Economic and Social Committee. This dialogue should provide impulse, verification and reflection on specific cases and prepare the adoption of decisions on implementation of investments. These provisions are the result of attention quite correctly paid during the negotiations on the 2014-2020 MFF to the principle of better spending for the EU budget. The implementation of the programming will be marked by the fact that the Commission will prepare a number of reports ranging from one on the outcome of the negotiations on partnership agreements, that's in 2015, to implementation of strategic reports from 2016, and also aimed at preparing the Spring European Councils on the implementation of the Europe 2020 strategy. Furthermore, the new provisions on macroeconomic conditionality refer to the dialogue with the European Parliament and to the decisions to be adopted by the Council following the Commission's proposals. We considered that attention to the consequences of this set of provisions in the regulations is a responsibility for our presidency in order to ensure continuity within the area of cohesion policy during this phase of transition in the life of the EU institutions. Our aim at the moment is to set up a political debate in a formal setting of the Council with the ambition to make clear the usefulness of such a debate. The sixth cohesion report the Commission will adopt in the next few days is a very valuable opportunity for debate and will allow reflections on the programming period which is currently coming to an end as well as the new one that's starting up. Furthermore, Within this General Affairs Council session dedicated to cohesion, we also intend to promote a contribution to the review process of the 2020 strategy from the perspective of cohesion policy and to emphasise the fundamental role it plays in its implementation. I believe that these actions express the importance our presidency places on cohesion policy and within the framework of the interventions at EU level to relaunch growth and jobs. I'm now ready for our dialogue. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. So we have now a basis, enough information for our discussion. And I would like to give the floor for the coordinators, maybe, first of all. Mr. Van Nistelrooy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's have it in 2 rounds with as many contributions of the members as possible. Let me be short. Thank you for all the information and the work done. In fact, a couple of short remarks. First, if you have the meeting of the ministers together, this informal meeting of the Minister for Regional Policy, please don't just look forward but also look backwards. The 6th Cohesion Report gives a lot of information, but especially about the payments. Because what I heard also during this 6th Cohesion Forum, that everyone talks on the future and the longer future, the 300 billion new money that should be created by the new President of the European Commission. But let's look to our performance and let's look to our payments. And I want to know from you how the situation in Italy is. In a lot of countries I hear that a lot of bills are put forward to 2015. A lot of extra scrutinizing on programs, on little things are happening to get it to the next year. Everybody is frustrated on the basis on how European institution works on their paying morale. It's something that is exploding between now and, let me say, a year. Because it can be that Europe goes on with the commitments here and the payments there. This is something that's hardly to be managed. And if we ask trust for our people, trust for companies, trust from public authorities to pay the co-financing, and Europe doesn't pay out, please, can you comment on that and put it on the agenda? And then you said you want to have an open and changed commitment with the institutions. Do you think about a broader participation from the Regi Committee, the President of course, but also in this debate? We are willing to come to your initiative, and you have mentioned two informal, 2 ministers' meetings, really important, but let me add one point about the payments, because they never come into European programs if at the end they don't get the money. Even some go bankrupt because of we have a late payment directive, accepted by the Council and accepted by everyone. But in 30 days we have to pay, except it does not, isn't it a rule for us? And this is a key point for the Council, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Van Nistelrooy. Mr. Vaughan? Or?
Okay. Yeah, okay. Just checking with the coordinator that it's okay if I speak.
You have to me
next.
check too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Minister, for your contribution. The first point I wanted to make was to follow on from Mr. Van Nistelrooy and the question he posed on the budget. We know, according to the Commission, at the end of 2013 there was a €23 billion backlog in payments, and the Commission also tell us at the end of this year there will still be a backlog to the tune of €18 billion, and obviously that potentially will cause some problems for beneficiaries, whether they local authorities, regions, universities, NGOs, businesses, all could face problems in terms of delayed payments. So you, I believe, will have a key role in the next few months in terms of trying to get this message across to the other member states. Many member states accept this position, but we know a number of member states don't accept this position. So I think you have a key role there in persuading Member States that there is a problem in terms of payments, and if they don't do something to resolve it, they will have all these businesses, NGOs, local authorities and regions coming to complain to them because of the delay in payments. So my question is similar to Mr Van Nistelrooy's. How are you, as President of the Council in the next few months, going to deal with this issue and persuade other Member States that they should be tackling the backlog in payments? The second point I wanted to make is on the issue of the Youth Employment Initiative, which you mentioned in your contribution, and the Youth Guarantee Scheme. We know Member States have now put forward their implementation plans, but not all Member States have actually started with the schemes and projects yet. We know, for example, some Member States aren't going to use the money to put in place a youth guarantee scheme. They're going to put the money in existing schemes which they are already running themselves. And there are lots of other examples where I believe there's a lack of coordination between Member States, where one Member State is doing or saying one thing and others are doing something completely different. So again, I think you have a key role in the next few months to make sure that all Member States are coordinated and they are using to the full effect to get the best impact out of cohesion policy funds, but other EU funds as well. So at the moment, I believe that's not happening. So you have a key role then. So again, I would ask you what you're going to do to trying to make sure that all Member States are coordinated, are taking coordinated action, and indeed are using all the funds which are available to the best effect.
Thank you. Mr. Luer, I'm sorry for the spelling of the name. That's fine. Thank you. So you, Mr. Jakovčić.
Dobar dan I poštovanje.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I hope that the Italian presidency devotes a significant part of its attention to the question of the Mediterranean. I'm from Croatia, and given that we are neighbours with Italy, sharing the same sea, I'd be very interested to hear from the Minister how cooperation throughout this Adriatic region and the Ionian region as well will be undertaken during the Italian presidency. I'll be eager to see what effect will be brought about by the Italian presidency's work, together with the different commissioners involved, Mr. Hahn in regional development, but also the commissioners responsible for enlargement and so on. Hopefully Italy and the Italian presidency will have a clear approach to this matter, given the fact that we share a common region and a common sea. Now, my question relates to a more general matter. I'm a new member of the European Parliament, and as part of the Croatian executive for nearly 20 years, I was surprised to see how tourism is not given a great deal of time and resources within the European Commission. I'd be interested to hear how Italy looks at the question of tourism. I believe it's dealt with as a matter of great importance within Italy, but it would be interesting to hear how cohesion can be brought to this matter, particularly with a view to improving the economy through tourism. Do you think that tourism can bring a benefit to the economy, particularly for young people, those who haven't benefited from high levels of education? We know that education and tourism do go hand in hand to a certain extent. So how can we improve tourism within Europe?
Yeah, Mr. Jakovčić. And now I will give the floor to the Vice Chair, Mr. Omaré.
Madame la Présidente, merci.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Representative of the Italian Presidency and Council, you mentioned the political importance of regional policy. of course, within this committee, we're extremely sensitive to that dimension. And we have made an important contribution. During the negotiations on the different funds involved, we looked at this objective almost exclusively. We have heard from Council that there are lots of friends of regional policy there. However, you also know that elsewhere there are a number of naysayers when it comes to regional policy. And I would stress just how important it is to demonstrate how effectively the funds are being used, to make sure the necessary transparency is in place so that we can undergo scrutiny and control to make sure the criticisms that are levelled at this kind of policy, often unfairly, can be refuted. Another matter that we have been focusing on, and which we intend to keep focusing on, relates to this question of the 23 billion euros in debt in terms of outstanding payments, which is giving rise to a number of concerns in the budget. At the present time, some juggling is going on to try to make sure payments are still being made, but that's obviously not something that can carry on. If we default, this will have serious consequences for the regions, and we'd like to know what the Italian presidency intends to do. Now, the final point that I'd like to raise relates to what we call a link between structural policy and economic governance. In other words, I think what we're talking about here is macroeconomic conditionality. Now, I would like to hear from you what different positions exist within the European Council. Is there a unified position regarding this connection between economic governance, or is there a variety of different approaches? I can also echo the words of our colleague Mr. Van Nistelrooy, namely that the Regional Development Committee should take part in the various different meetings that the Italian presidency intends to hold and attends the various different initiatives under the Italian presidency, of course. Thank you.
And now give the floor to Madame Vanna.
Okay. Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd also like to echo the questions that have been put by previous speakers regarding outstanding payments and the impact that that has on cohesion policy. Of course, it also detracts from the credibility of the European Union. It has an impact on the trust that people have. It really does need a direct solution. The question that I have relates to a matter that you mentioned, the investment programme, 300 billion euros. The working programme that Commissioner Juncker is putting together still has a number of points to be concluded. My question is what values will be focused on in this investment programme. We've talked a lot about sustainable development and sustainable growth. You did mention sustainable growth once, but we'd very much like to hear exactly how this ties in with investment in the environment, in alternative energies, and how sustainable growth can actually be incorporated within the Italian presidency's programme. Also, when it comes to employment and the fight against youth unemployment, there is one important point that you mentioned, which is public investment. I'm thinking particularly of public services and public investments in that field. These are, of course, of vital importance. So my question is, what kind of milestones do you have looking ahead in terms of investment in the public services? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Madam D'Amato.
Sì, buonasera. Più o meno le domande abbiamo capito che... I think people have concentrated their questions on the same issues, really. And I'd like to look at the Stability Pact, what's important is we have sustainable investments in new industries. That's one thing that's very important. Tourism is very sustainable, as somebody has mentioned. But what we've got to do is, in future meetings between ministers, we've got to focus not just on crucial aspects of the Stability Pact, but also the structural funds, how this ties in. Structural funds have got to really be to the benefit of the citizens. We've got to ensure that that really takes place, including Italy.
Thank you. So we finalize the first round, and the floor is yours for answers. Thank you.
Grazie. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those questions. First of all, I will try and sum up the questions, take them together in terms of the topics raised for this first round. This question of payments, this is a primary topic. It's one of the most important aspects in the ultimate efficiency of our cohesion policies. Of course, commitments that make no sense at all unless we have the corresponding payments in the budget. So we will certainly be focusing on this. We know it's a key aspect in terms of defending the cohesion fund. So we will do our utmost in our negotiations to try and reinforce this point. And of course we are open to any suggestions that you may have as well. What we need to do is try and preserve this very important aspect. We know that there have been severe cuts in the budget. Partially they have affected the headings related to cohesion. So thankfully there haven't been too large cuts to affect that, but they have partially affected them. What we've got to do is to discuss things immediately. We've got that 19th of November meeting with the General Affairs Council. We will be certainly focusing on this aspect of payments. We'll be talking about cohesion policies because they do, of course, have extreme relevance. We will also be looking at this in particular aspects. One of the key elements, we are aware of that. So this is a key commitment of the Italian presidency. I can guarantee you that we will be bearing this in mind all the time. And then there was a topic raised of, I think it was Mr. Vaughan that mentioned this, that a kind of mismatch between the projects for the youth employment, and certainly this coordination between the member states is important. We need a lot of coordination here. There's a lot of hope invested in these schemes. In Italy, you know what the situation is probably in terms of youth unemployment. We've got a very high rate of youth unemployment in our country. The problem is, and we've mentioned this before in the informal meetings that we've had with ministers of labour as well, is that there's sometimes a lot of fragmentation in the projects. We've got to ensure that there's more coordination in the youth guarantee schemes within the member states themselves. So this aspect of coordination is something that we really do need to focus on. It is a weak spot that we do need to mitigate and improve on. And then I'd like to reassure Mr. Van Nistelrooy that we'll do all our best to honour the payment deadlines. We know that we need economic support for all these projects because otherwise they're just empty words. So we will do our best to try and ensure that. And then Mr. Jakovic, the current state of play in terms of the Adriatic strategy, this is something that he mentioned. The Adriatic strategy is something that was initiated and continues to be worked on with a great deal of sensitivity on our part. I can guarantee you that this is one of the key elements. We are looking at, in particular, at the blue economy, the tourism, how that can play a role in this. You mentioned this as well. It is a key element and part and parcel of that strategy. we will have a meeting on the Adriatic strategy. It will be dedicated entirely to that strategy, and we will see what happens after that. We will try to be activating the various commitments that we've made. Italy has made some commitments in this respect, but other member states have as well. And it's one of the opportunities that we really need to draw on within this strategy. That Adriatic strategy is something that can have a knock-on effect on many other aspects, including the tourism sector. Vice President Mr. Omarjee mentioned the issue of the fact that there are also lots of criticism being levelled at the regional policies. It's not just supporters, but regional policies really do need to implement the policies that they were designed for. That's what they're doing, to ensure that there is strategic planning, there is development, special development for each individual territory that is sustainable. So the best answer that can be given to these detractors really is that it boosts employment, it boosts growth. We are all trying to achieve that. We think in the Italian presidency that there needs to be a good balance struck between national and regional policies. That's important for the overall growth of member states, but also for Europe as a whole. So transparency in funding, yes, that's important. Accountability in terms of the use of funds, these things are all inherent in our strategy. And then you asked me macroeconomic conditions, the questions along that. Yes, there are various different positions, and I think the balanced position that was achieved the last time, never to have a non-automatic mechanism that requires evaluation of the very specific conditions on a case-by-case basis. That is something that is a productive approach vis-à-vis a rule or a regulation that has raised a lot of doubts, and I think those doubts are in many ways legitimate. That's my personal view. So a case-by-case evaluation is the way forward, I think. And then there was somebody from the German Parliament, I think, says the speaker. Didn't note down the name, but I can't answer that very specific question at the moment. I would like to know myself how that 300 billion is going to be broken down in terms of investments, sustainability, employment, all of these things. I'm sorry, at the moment we can't answer that question. Probably Mr. Juncker will be able to answer that question much more correctly than I can. We're hoping that we'll get the information on that as soon as possible. Then Somato talked about the Stability and Growth Pact and how that ties in with the cohesion policy. Well, clearly the opinion that I think is a shared one is that the policies on growth and employment are a huge chapter for us. It's a huge challenge, and they belong together. And I said this in my speech, namely that it seems consistent with a boost in growth to ensure that we evaluate co-funding, and that should be excluded from the Stability and Growth Pact. To me, that seems a logical, reasonable way forward, because investments are not necessarily investments carried out on a member state basis, but they're a European investment after all. And I'm hoping that the new Commission will make headway on this. Of course, we need to take our time, it's important, but I hope we'll get something off the ground soon. We need a we need a way of boosting the growth, and that means that we need to boost public investment as well. That's very important. Thank you.
Colleagues, we have more than 30 minutes for the next round of questions, and we already have some of the colleagues who gave us their wish to put the question. Mrs. Bresso, the floor is yours.
Grazie Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Delrio, the State Secretary, has recalled the 20% investment in Europe. This is the European average, so what this means is that it's likely to be more in some areas of Europe. I think if we were to look at an analysis of current expenditure, the situation would appear very different. So all of the European institutions have made these demands within 2020 and within the cohesion funds. And despite the importance of these investments to start growth and employment, the real situation is quite different. So within your competencies, of course, how does the Italian presidency intend to really turn this fundamental policy round? Yes, we're talking about the 300 million, which should be additional, not substitution. How can we use them to ensure that the cohesion policy is at the heart of the new programming, and also to ensure that we have measures which will allow member states who are being cautious in their spending, what can we do to ensure that they can do more with investment? There are various scenarios possible. I'm just wondering how you plan to deal with it.
Thank you, Madam. Madam Krehl.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Well, firstly, my apologies. Unfortunately, I arrived rather late and I wasn't able to follow your introductory statement. Unfortunately, when you have to fly to the Parliament, occasionally you do arrive half an hour late or so. I'm very sorry about that. But if I ask something that you've already answered, please don't hesitate. Just tell me it's already been answered. But I would like to address the issue of the outstanding payments. Now, this isn't a new problem. This is something that has been recurring time and time again. I really do want to follow up this matter. Within the Italian presidency, do you have concrete proposals to mitigate the problem? It's really become rather a perverse situation. The only investment programme that the European Union actually has can't actually be financed because we can't meet the payments. We hear from several different member states that programmes have been carried out and at the end the bills can't be paid. Now that, of course, detracts from the trust that we need people to have in us if we're to carry on investing in future programmes and projects. Now I would very much like to hear a more concrete answer other than just the answer that it's always been like that and we'll try to do what we can. I do have a great deal of hope for the problem being solved under the Italian presidency. Secondly, another question. There aren't all that many approved partnership programmes and projects. Do you have any initiatives that you've planned, if this is of course what you're trying to achieve, but to try to take member states under your wing, if you like, to try to help them, to try to negotiate their way through these programmes? It's all rather complicated, but there are some countries that have more experience, other countries have less. And of course it is in the interests of the member states to try to get these projects up and running as soon as possible. Now, the operational programme hasn't yet been approved or concluded, at least not all of it has, and that, of course, leads to a delay in everything, which is not positive when it comes to trying to fight against youth unemployment, particularly. Do you have any kind of idea on a question of a transitional period where, while we don't have new programmes in place and new ideas up and running, we can carry on with the old programmes or implement a kind of transitional period to try to continue the financing for programmes? Or do you think it will be a question of trying to complete all the projects before the new programmes come online?
Floor to the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Guzzolino.
No, l'ultima osservazione di Costanza è...
I think the last thing that Constanza said was very important. We have a twofold problem at European level. There are countries who are finishing off their 2007-2014 programme. So we need to come up with some kind of tool which will allow them to finish off their programmes without losing financing. But on the other hand, there is a delay in some partnership agreements, and so this means that the 2014-2020 programme won't start before the middle of 2015. So it's going to be a few months late, perhaps even more than a few months. Over a year, perhaps. So this is a twofold problem, and I think that what Costanza said was very important on that. In the coming weeks, we're going to face a very complicated situation when we see that some programs have been completed and some not. The second point that I wanted to raise for the Italian presidency is that we know there's always a lot of discussions when we go into the issue of the Stability Pact, and when we raise the issue of investment programs and if they're too closely linked to other criteria. But I don't think, well, I think last year the Regi Committee came up with one initiative on this, but I don't think there's ever been an in-depth study, either by the Council or the Commission, on the costs that we are paying. Because we're not uncoupling huge resources from the Stability Pact, resources that could be available to member states. How many resources are we losing? How much GDP are we losing? So perhaps together with the Parliament we could come up with some kind of a study, an investigation which the Italian presidency could take on. And then this could be left to future presidencies or the future commission, and they would have some kind of objective study for them, where we could raise the main issues that we often have to discuss, we often have to talk about, areas where we don't always have competency to take decisions, which are often quite sensitive areas. But what's the cost in... what are the costs of this kind of programme, other than the general cost 20% for future years, not a current expenditure and investments, but how much does this all cost in terms of employment, in terms of GDP, in terms of environmental sustainability programmes, etc.? We haven't managed to remove cohesion policy from the Stability Pact. There isn't much research, there's not much investigation on that. So perhaps I would call on the Commission and Council to open this dossier up, which would invite all of us to reflect more objectively on these kind of issues.
Thank you. And Mr. Chiku, please.
Sì, grazie Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. I think I can echo a lot of what's been said, particularly what's been said just now. But I would remind the Undersecretary that we do need to have the strategic approach that you referred to. We have at European level growth and employment policies, youth policies, and particularly with reference to SMEs. We have to remember the different ways in which regions are treated within Europe. Regional policies have to be implemented and sustained. 99% of SMEs are what makes us productive and encourages growth. But we're not seeing equal treatment. Gender equality, for example, is another fundamental topic when it comes to European cohesion policy. If we had in-depth studies on gender policy, that could help with an immediate increase in GDP. If we had, for example, immediate investment in access to employment with reference to gender equality. I'm not going to go into other specifics, but I think that what we need is something from the Italian presidency to ensure that the policies we enact actually allow us to avoid another huge tragedy, to ensure that for reasons of gender or because of young people, etc., they don't have access to European funds. So apart from the late payments, which is also a huge problem that we have to overcome, but above and beyond that, I think we have to talk about the future and bear in mind that we need to ensure that the conditions are made as optimal as possible to ensure that SMEs, young people, women have equal access to the job market. I think this is also part of your responsibility that you have at the moment for Europe as a whole.
Mr. Bogovic.
Hvala. Thank you very much. The sixth cohesion report is very clear about something, and that is how important the cohesion funds are for the investments in individual member states. The percentages range between 20 and 80% of public investments. I'm coming from Slovenia, and in Slovenia, most of the public investment during this time have been conditioned with the use of the cohesion funds. But we have a problem. We need to use 1/3 of all the funds of cohesion funds between 2007-2011. And this backlog, this payment backlog represents a major problem for Slovenia and for the municipalities of Slovenia. We have major problems regarding this, and the presidency should find some solutions regarding the payment backlogs so that we could successfully conclude the payment period 2007-2011. I would also like to call upon the presidency to make one step further so that those countries who have not yet signed the partnerships agreements be stimulated and that this partnership agreement be signed as soon as possible so that in the new period between 2014-2020 we could start adopting new programs swiftly and that we could also start using the funds efficiently. So two things. We need to solve the payment backlogs, and second, member states should be motivated to sign the agreements as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bogovic. Mr. Etheridge.
Thank you. I'll be comparatively brief with a couple of points of clarification I was interested in, and thank you for that very detailed report that we had at the start. I may have been mistaken, but did you say during the report that cohesion funding would be excluded from deficit figures? And if so, I'm very interested in that because I wonder if that's how that falls into responsible accounting. But more importantly, you touched on something I found very interesting as well, was the results-orientated approach. I agree with this. This is a very good way of going about it. I wondered, was the result that you're looking at a huge Keynesian-style spending splurge, a little bit like the 1930s, to create jobs for the 25 million unemployed that you mentioned across the EU? Or was it more for the cohesion towards a sort of fledgling federal European state? Was it more down those lines, or do you feel that in your philosophy the two things come together and that's the only way to solve the situation? So if I could get clarification on them, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your brief question. And again, the Vice Chair of the Committee, Mr. Polchak.
Děkuji, paní předsedkyně.
Thank you, President. Mr. Undersecretary, I have a very brief question concerning the use of cohesion funds. Cohesion policy, with its budget of 450 billion euros, is the main investment tool in the European Union, and it is designed to support SMEs. It is supposed to reduce unemployment, support low-carbon economy, and so on and so forth. But my question is, since you yourself mentioned that there is an underlying low effectiveness of the use of these funds, and our aim is obviously to maximize the effect, and therefore my question is, what tools is the Italian presidency going to use, or are there any new tools that you are going to implement in order to improve the effectiveness of the cohesion funds? So could you specify what tools are you going to use? Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have more questions. Am I right? Oh, please, Mr. Fitto.
Sì, grazie. Molto rapidamente.
Thank you. Very briefly. Rather than a question, I just want to raise a strong concern about some of the comments that have been made. I don't think there's any justification for the negative practices that we see within regional policy. We need to have courage and clarity to overcome some of its shortcomings, and also to emphasize its benefits. I think there are two main issues which have to be a backdrop to our considerations. My concerns are that the 300 billion in future investments are quite generic, that we've heard about in recent days. Some colleagues have said they're going to be additional. I hope so. Within the budget and the quotas on cohesion policy, I hope that there won't be any concerns once we reorganise these investments and reorganise the programmes under the 300 billion. The second concern is on the Stability Pact. It's not a question. I just want to raise a concern that I have. The concerns about payments for the 2007-13 payments, together with the start of the new programming period, and the importance on the Stability Pact and lack of responses that we've seen so far. I think we need to ensure that we can ensure that there are growth opportunities. Now, obviously, on all of these topics, there will be difference in different territorial policy, but my concern is that this topic has to be really raised raised strongly, because this is something that we really need to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fitto. And now, do we have more questions? No more. Thank you. We are ready with the questions from the second round, so the floor is yours, Mr. Delrio.
Thank you. Dunque,
Well, some questions were posed about the Stability Pact and growth analysis. I think the suggestion made by Mr. Cozzolino is interesting to look at. Looking at the cost of investments that haven't been made is also something that we could reflect on. It's something that we don't reflect on sufficiently. Costs, or the cost of lost investment on growth in Europe and in comparison with other countries. However, some of you raised concerns about the links with budgetary rigour, and we're not removing investments from that. I would say that we are simply saying how important it is that the Stability and Growth Pact should be interpreted in both ways, in terms of stability and growth. So yes, we're looking at the impact on GDP. If, as we hope, and if, as some of you have said, there will be additional investments on the cohesion policy outside of the Stability Pact, as I said, then I think we have to look at investments used by member states and how much co-financing is used by member states. This has to be evaluated also how helpful, in terms of how helpful it's been to stimulating GDP growth. Furthermore, as you know, we already have negotiations and procedures such as the investment clause, which do allow a certain amount of flexibility in the Stability and Growth Pact funds and their use, in terms of the quality and quantity of investments. Clearly, strategic investments such as the European networks are strategic investments to help to unify Europe and to ensure that there will be greater energy efficiency, low carbon emissions in Europe. I think also they help to lead to develop a new type of economy over the long to medium term and will allow more stable employment. Not all investments are going to be used for ensuring a federal Europe, as Mr. Etheridge said, or to have any kind of Asian-style stimulation policy. Not all investments are useful in that light, but I think that we do need more in-depth analysis of the impact of these investments. Also, in light of the previous programming periods, how long-lasting the effects of the investments have been, ensuring that they're not just transitory. And I think this is going to be really important in the next 7-year period. In the coming months, we'll be able to we're having negotiations on the national operational plans and regional operational plans. This work has already started, I think, in a good, effective way. Commissioner Hahn will be able to tell you about that in much more detail after me. He's following this hearing. Some countries have already taken on ex-ante conditionality. So ensuring that there isn't another drop in economic terms or in terms of employment. They've taken on ex-ante conditionality as an important point. And I think that the work has been done in recent years on ex-ante conditionality will help to make investments much more effective. In response to Mrs. Krehl, I've understood that payments is one of the most important issues that we're going to have to work on. So I take account of what you said, and I will endeavour to work on this in much more depth. Obviously, we have to ensure that we're prepared for payments, but payment provisions are much better when more care has been paid to the expenditure provisions. So I think we have to work much more on the upstream issues relating to payments. On the partnership programme, we've had some problems because the payments were only sent in at the end of December 2013. So the 2014-20 programme is going to be a few months late. Even at this stage in the negotiations, I think that Mr. Hahn will be able to provide more up-to-date information since he's following it personally. Obviously, every country will try to do their best in this phase. I don't think the right tool is just to make exceptions or delay things. I think we need more flexibility and time to provide. We've had time for suitable national and regional operational plans. I think we are the country with the most operational programmes throughout the Union. We have a lot at national level. I think we need to see support, as many of you said, including Mr. Bogovic. And this is the path that we really need to follow. There are many possibilities for stimulating growth. As I said in my report, I think the main scenario we have to focus on is not just generic exclusion or generic clauses or clauses for every individual country. I think we need comprehensive Commission programmes for relaunching growth and investment. For example, the co-financing quota in certain programmes or projects. Obviously, all of the concerns that have been raised today by Mr. Cipo, Mr. Cozzolino, Mrs. Bresso, and Mr. Fitto. These are all issues which we will be paying close attention to in the coming months. Not because we want to see individual exclusions for individual countries, but to look at the consistency of the strategy as a whole. I think that should have more or less answered all of your concerns. I'd just like to thank you once again for all the contributions that you've made over these last few months of work, and I hope we're going to have some helpful, fruitful work coming up for everyone.
Mr. Delrio. It was very informative exchange of views and opinions, and I would like to stress that all the questions put it by the members of the committee, members of the European Parliament, are important because these are questions coming from the European citizens. We represent all the everyday questions related to the regional policy and implementation of the regional policy. These are questions of payments, but these are questions of trust between the citizens and the European Union and European institutions. So we expect that you'll mention all our questions. Thank you for your participation in the meeting of the committee, and we'll be happy to meet you again here. Thank you very much.